A magnificent bull was screaming in pain from a terrible wound, until a mysterious stranger arrived with an incredible gift for healing. What happens next will leave you speechless. Brutus's bellow tore through the stillness like a jagged blade through cloth. Ethan Caldwell froze mid-step, the sound tightening every muscle in his body. It wasn't the impatient call of an animal hungry for feed or irritated by flies. This was raw pain, deep and desperate. He dropped the feed sack he was carrying, heart hammering, and broke into a run across the uneven pasture. The grass whipped at his legs as he pushed forward, scanning the fence line for any sign of trouble. The cries grew louder, more ragged, pulling him toward the far slope where the late sunlight lay in long, gold streaks. His boots thudded against the packed earth, the air thick with the scent of trampled grass. And then he saw him. Brutus, the ranch's most valuable breeding bull, staggering in tight circles as though trying to shake off something clinging to his side. Blood soaked the ground beneath him in dark, wet patches. The sight made Ethan's stomach knot. The bull's massive frame shuddered with every breath, his eyes rolling wildly. That's when Ethan saw it, a jagged metal spike jutting out from the animal's flank. Its surface wasn't clean or polished like a fence post tip. It was charred black around the edges, the kind of black you only saw after heat and fire. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. No one leaves something like that by mistake. This wasn't the work of an accident, or even a predator. Someone had stepped onto their land, past fences and warning signs, with the intent to wound or kill. "Easy, boy. Easy," Ethan murmured, edging closer. Brutus swayed, his front hooves gouging deep grooves in the dirt, as if every step sent fire through him. The bull's head dropped low, nostrils flaring. Ethan knew the animal's strength well. One wrong move, and he could find himself on the wrong end of a charge. But Brutus looked too weak to attack. Still, the ranch hand kept his movements slow and deliberate. He crouched low, eyes flicking to the tree line at the edge of the pasture. The branches swayed in the wind, whispering in a way that made the hairs on his arms rise. The feeling that he wasn't alone was too strong to ignore. He considered his options. The ranch's nearest barn was a good 300 yards away. He could try to run for tools and rope, maybe get the vet on the phone, but Brutus didn't look like he had minutes to spare, let alone the time it would take for a vet to arrive. That's when the wind seemed to still for just a heartbeat. Out of the shadows between the trees, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the fading light. His coat was dust-stained, the sort worn by men who traveled far and didn't stop often. His boots sank slightly into the soft ground, but his steps were deliberate, unhurried. He carried no rifle, no rope, just a worn leather satchel hanging from one shoulder. Ethan's instincts kicked hard. Ironvale wasn't a place strangers wandered into, especially not this deep into private pasture. He straightened slightly, his hand tightening on the wooden fence post beside him, ready to grab it if he needed to defend himself. The man's eyes were sharp, dark like freshly turned soil, and fixed not on Ethan but on Brutus. "If you want that bull to live," he said, his voice low but firm, "you'll let me work." Ethan's suspicion flared instantly. "Who are you? How do you know what's wrong with him?" The stranger's gaze finally shifted to Ethan, and for a moment, Ethan felt as though the man could see straight through him. "Does it matter?" the man asked. "You've got a dying animal, and I've got the means to keep him breathing. You decide." The bull's legs buckled briefly, and he let out a grunt that sounded more like a groan. Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't know this man, didn't trust him, but every second they wasted arguing was another second Brutus lost. After a tense pause, he stepped back, motioning to the bull. "Fine, but I'm staying right here." The stranger gave a single nod, almost like he'd expected that answer. He knelt by Brutus, lowering the satchel to the dirt. The flap came open to reveal tools that didn't belong in any veterinary kit Ethan had ever seen. There were no gleaming stainless steel instruments, no syringes or surgical scissors. Instead, the man unrolled a length of canvas holding objects worn smooth by use: short, curved blades, glass vials of dark liquid, rolls of linen that looked handmade. A smell rose from the satchel, sharp and earthy, laced with something metallic. Ethan's nose wrinkled. It was the scent of wild herbs mixed with iron and smoke, a smell that felt old. The stranger reached for a small curved blade, holding it lightly in one hand. "Name's Garrick," he said without looking up, "and you're about to see something you won't believe." Ethan opened his mouth to press for more, where Garrick came from, how he'd known to be here, but a deep part of him recognized the weight behind the man's words. Whatever was about to happen wasn't going to be something he could explain away with common sense. Still, he kept his eyes locked on Garrick's every move, because in Ironvale, trust was earned the hard way, and sometimes it came too late. "Would you like me to continue with Garrick's full healing process and the first hints of external threat within this same Part 1 so that it reaches the 7,000 character target and fully builds tension toward Part 2? That would allow for deeper suspense before the handoff. Garrick's hands moved with the steadiness of a man who had done this countless times, though not in any way Ethan had ever seen. He slid the small curved blade into the wound with a swift, practiced motion, gripping the spike firmly. For a moment, Brutus's entire body tensed, his massive muscles locking in pain. Then, with one clean pull, Garrick freed the metal from the bull's side. The spike came out slick with blood, and Ethan saw it more clearly now. Its tip was coated in a dark, powdery residue, and the blackened metal gave off an acrid smell, like burnt tar mixed with something sharp enough to sting his nostrils. Garrick didn't stop to examine it. He tossed the spike aside into the dirt as though it were a viper, and reached into his satchel for a small jar. When he unscrewed the lid, a thick, tar-like paste caught the light, its color shifting between black and deep green, the surface rippling faintly as though it were alive. Without hesitation, Garrick pressed a clump of the salve directly into Brutus's wound. The paste hissed instantly, releasing a faint curl of smoke and a smell of damp earth and bitter herbs. Ethan stepped forward, alarmed. "What is that stuff?" His voice was sharp, both from fear for the bull and the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. Garrick didn't look up. "Hold him steady." Ethan hesitated but moved closer, gripping Brutus's thick neck and speaking low to soothe him. The bull's shuddering breaths slowed with each second Garrick worked. That change made Ethan falter. Whatever was in that jar, it was doing something. Still, the questions piled in his mind. "You didn't answer me," Ethan pressed. "What is it?" Garrick's voice was quiet, almost distant. "Something older than this land." It was the only answer Ethan got before Garrick began murmuring words under his breath. The language was unlike anything Ethan recognized. Low, rhythmic, almost like a chant. The tone was steady, and each phrase seemed to match the motion of Garrick's hands as he spread the salve, packing it deeper into the wound. The bull's ears twitched at the sound, but his body eased under Ethan's grip. For a moment, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and suspicion. This man might just save Brutus's life, but nothing about this felt normal. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Over Garrick's shoulder, beyond the far fence line, two shapes stood in the tall grass. They were motionless, silhouettes against the dying light, both wearing long dark coats that swayed faintly in the breeze. Their faces were shadowed beneath the brims of their hats, but Ethan didn't need to see them clearly to know trouble had arrived. His stomach tightened. The Caldwell Ranch had been dealing with problems for weeks: cut fences, missing feed, and cattle driven into ditches. Word around town pointed to the Crowden outfit, a group of men who made their living forcing smaller ranchers to sell out. This wasn't their land, but they'd never cared much for boundaries. Ethan's hand itched toward the fence post again, but before he could speak, Garrick's voice cut in, not the chanting, but calm, certain words. "I know they're there." Ethan blinked at him. "What?" "They've been following me since yesterday," Garrick said, sealing the wound with a final press of linen. "They're not here for the ranch. They're here for me." Ethan glanced back at the figures, still watching, still silent. "If that's true, why go after Brutus?" "To draw me out," Garrick replied, finally meeting Ethan's gaze. His eyes were as sharp as before, but now Ethan saw something else, an old, bone-deep wariness. "And now that they've seen me, they won't stop." Ethan's gut told him this was no simple feud over grazing land. "You need to tell me what's going on." Garrick stood, wiping his hands on a strip of cloth. "If I do, you won't thank me for it. Right now, you need to decide. Are you helping me or not?" The bull shifted his weight, letting out a low groan, but the wild panic from earlier was gone. His breathing was deep, steady. Ethan's loyalty to the ranch was unquestionable. But looking into Garrick's eyes, he knew this wasn't just about one wounded animal. Something bigger was at play, and it had walked straight onto their land. "I'll help," Ethan said, the words surprising even himself. A brief nod from Garrick, then he stooped to gather his tools. Together they moved to Brutus's side, guiding him slowly toward the barn. The bull's steps were unsteady, each hoof thudding into the dirt, but he followed their coaxing. They reached the barn doors just as the light was sinking into full dusk. Ethan's hands found the heavy wooden latch, ready to shut it, when a voice rang out across the pasture, low, deliberate, and chilling in its certainty. "That bull's not yours anymore." Ethan froze. The words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. The meaning was plain enough. He turned toward the fence line. The two figures were still there, but now they were joined by a third, taller, broader, standing a step ahead of the others like a man who expected to be obeyed. Ethan felt the first sharp edge of fear, because it wasn't just the animal they were after. The barn door thudded shut behind them, sealing out the last of the fading light. The air inside was heavy with the scent of hay, old timber, and Brutus's labored breathing. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching longer with each flicker from the single lantern Garrick had set on a beam. He didn't waste time. "That spike they used wasn't just steel," Garrick said, pulling the weapon from where he'd dropped it earlier. "The tip was coated in something rare, a toxin designed to strip an animal's will to move, makes them easier to lead away, or to kill slowly." His voice was even, but his eyes stayed fixed on the spike like it was something that might still bite. Ethan swallowed hard. "You're saying this wasn't just to hurt him?" "It was a message," Garrick replied, setting the spike down on a crate. He hesitated for the first time that night, as if weighing whether to speak. "I know because I've used it before." The words landed heavy between them. Ethan straightened, unsure if he'd heard right. "I worked for the Crowden outfit once," Garrick continued, his tone flat, unflinching. "They called me a problem solver. When they needed something taken, someone silenced, a threat erased, I handled it. Until I stopped." "And they didn't take that kindly," Ethan said, the pieces falling into place. "Number and now they've come to finish what they think I owe them." Garrick's gaze shifted to Brutus, lying in the straw, breathing slow but steady. "He's not the prize, he's bait." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. The thought that Brutus's suffering had been calculated, planned just to lure a man here, made his stomach turn. And if Garrick was right, then this night wasn't over. "What's the plan?" Ethan asked. Garrick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked the length of the barn, his eyes tracing beams, walls, and open spaces. Then he began gathering supplies, lengths of rope, spare planks, oil lamps, nails from a rusty tin. He moved with purpose, not pausing to explain until he had laid out each item on a workbench. "They'll come here before morning," he said finally. "When they do, we'll give them a choice, walk away or burn for it." Ethan frowned. "Burn?" Garrick pointed to the oil lamps. "We set them around the barn in a ring. Rope lines run through pulleys up in the beams. When the intruders are inside, we pull the ropes, send the lamps swinging. They hit the floor here." He tapped the dirt in a circle. "The oil will light, but the flame will be controlled. A wall they can't cross without getting cooked. It keeps them away from the bull. Buys us time." Ethan stared at the plan. It was dangerous, unpredictable. "What if it gets out of control?" "Then we lose the barn," Garrick said, his tone grim. "But not the bull, not our lives." There wasn't time to argue. They worked in silence, moving with urgency. Ethan hauled bales to stack along the walls, blocking potential escape points for anyone who got trapped inside. Garrick rigged the ropes high above, his sure-footed balance in the rafters betraying years of doing this kind of work. The barn became something else entirely, less a shelter, more a snare. Hours crept past. Outside, the night pressed in heavy and cold, the stillness broken only by the occasional creak of timber or Brutus shifting in the straw. Ethan's mind kept circling back to the figures in the field. Were they still out there, watching? Or had they slipped away to gather more? The answer came in the form of a dull, rhythmic thud against the barn doors. The wood shivered under the impact. "They're here," Garrick said quietly, moving to the rope's end. The thudding grew harder, faster. Boards groaned. Dust rained down from the rafters. Then came the sharp crack of splintering wood, and moonlight spilled in through a widening gap. The doors gave way in a single violent push. 4 men surged into the barn, their faces caught in the trembling light from the oil lamps. They moved with the certainty of men who had done this before, 2 heading straight for the bull, one swinging a length of chain, another pulling a short iron bar from his belt. Ethan's heart pounded in his throat. "Now!" he hissed. "Now!" Garrick said, yanking the rope hard. Above them, the lamps swung from their hooks, arcs of light flashing across the barn. Then, with a series of dull crashes, they slammed into the dirt. Oil splashed outward, igniting instantly. The flames rose in a circle, the heat pressing in on Ethan's face, the glow throwing the intruders' shadows high on the walls. The men froze, their path to the bull cut off by a wall of fire. The smell of burning oil filled the air, sharp and suffocating. "This is where you walk away," Garrick warned, his voice cutting clean through the roar of the flames. But the man at the front, the tall one with the chain, just smiled coldly. His eyes gleamed in the firelight. "You've still got no idea who really sent us." Before Ethan could make sense of the words, the man reached into his coat and pulled out something small and black. His arm moved in a quick, practiced throw, and the object spun through the air toward Brutus. Ethan shouted a warning, but Garrick was already moving. He snatched the object from the air with one hand. It was another spike, identical to the first, but the moment Garrick's skin touched it, he flinched violently. His fingers tightened, but his hand reddened instantly, as though the metal were searing hot. Ethan saw the pain ripple through him, but Garrick didn't drop it. He held the spike, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the men through the fire. The real fight had only just begun. The air inside the barn was already hot, the flicker of flames along the far wall casting long, restless shadows over the wooden beams. Garrick moved first, his eyes cutting through the haze with the precision of someone who had seen chaos before. Smoke curled past his face, but his focus was fixed on the three intruders who had cornered Brutus. The bull's pained bellows shook the rafters, the smell of singed hair rising with each kick of his massive legs. Garrick's hand shot forward to grab a loose rope from the wall, but in the rush, he brushed against a burning beam. The sizzle was instant. His palm blistered, the pain sharp enough to blur his vision. Yet his grip tightened, the injury ignored as he swung the rope low, catching one man's ankle and yanking him down. Ethan didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged through his chest, his own fear drowned under the need to protect Brutus. He lunged forward, meeting the second attacker head-on. Their shoulders collided, and both men crashed to the ground in a spray of straw. The glint of steel flashed between them, a short serrated knife clutched in the intruder's fist. Ethan's heart pounded so hard it felt like his ribs might split. He fought to pin the man's wrist, the blade slicing a thin line across his sleeve before he wrenched it free and tossed it into the flames. The man snarled, twisting violently, but Ethan's weight held. Garrick was moving with controlled ferocity now. He snatched up a wide plank from a broken stall door and swung it like a barrier, forcing the third intruder back toward the wall. The heat made the air shimmer, and for a moment it seemed as though the fire itself was pushing the men inward. A deliberate trap, Garrick thought, one he had set the moment he'd lit the outer straw piles to block their escape. The intruders glanced at each other, realization dawning too late. Through the coughing and shouting, Ethan caught the leader's voice, deeper and sharper than the others. "The buyer's waiting at the eastern ridge. We don't have time for this." The words sliced through the noise, planting an unshakable question in Ethan's mind. This was not a random act. Someone had ordered Brutus to be taken, and the scale of it was bigger than the barn they were fighting in. The smoke was thickening fast, curling into their lungs and forcing their eyes to sting. Brutus's movements were slowing. The bull's sides heaved heavily, his massive head dipping as though each breath cost him strength. Garrick's sharp gaze flicked toward the beast. The fire was no longer just a weapon. It was becoming a threat to their survival. "We can't keep this up," Garrick barked, his voice low but commanding. He dropped the plank, seized a rusted handsaw from a nearby workbench, and moved toward the back wall. With quick, decisive strokes, he began cutting through the boards. Each groan of the wood was nearly drowned by the crackle of the fire and the frantic shuffling of the restrained intruders. Ethan scrambled to help, his muscles screaming from the earlier struggle. Together, they pulled away a section of wall just wide enough for Brutus to pass through. The bull's eyes rolled, his nostrils flaring as Garrick stepped into his path, speaking in a steady, almost hypnotic tone. "Come on, boy. Follow me. Easy now. Easy." The bull shifted forward, his hooves crunching against the dirt floor, and with a final lurch he pushed through into the cool night air. The moment Brutus was clear, Garrick turned back to the intruders. Rope loops were thrown, knots tied tight. The leader was the last to be bound, his teeth bared in a threat that seemed meant as much for Garrick as for Ethan. "You think this ends here? You have no idea who you're up against." His words hung in the smoke, heavy with promise. The glow of the fire reflected off the wet eyes of a neighbor standing outside, shouting for help. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew closer. The sheriff's men arrived with buckets and axes, their boots pounding against the hard ground as they rushed to contain the blaze. 2 deputies dragged the intruders away, their muffled curses trailing behind. Garrick didn't stay for explanations. He moved with a strange, almost practiced urgency, reaching into his coat and pulling out a small leather pouch. It felt unexpectedly heavy in Ethan's palm when he handed it over. "You'll need this. They'll try again." His eyes held something unspoken, warning, or perhaps regret, before he stepped back into the darkness, the edges of his figure swallowed by the moonlit fields. Ethan stood in the cooling air, the pouch warm from Garrick's hand, its contents unknown but strangely important. Brutus stood nearby, his breathing still labored but steadier now. The bull's massive head lowered slightly as Ethan laid a hand on his shoulder. In the days that followed, Brutus recovered steadily, eating again and pacing the paddock as though nothing had happened. Ethan worked tirelessly, raising the fences higher, installing watchposts where the land dipped low. But Garrick's parting words stayed with him like a shadow he couldn't step out of. Some nights, in the quiet before dawn, Ethan would pause his rounds and scan the ridge beyond the paddock. The horizon was still, yet he would swear, just for a moment, that a lone figure stood there, guarding, or perhaps waiting, or perhaps... Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of compassion, unexpected aid, and the profound, almost mystical connection that can form between a human and an animal. This narrative aims to highlight the extraordinary power of empathy and remind us that a true remedy can come from the most unlikely of places.